Good evening, friends. Thanks so much for being with us for the second installment of the Justice Summer Series. My name is Guy Delcom. I serve as the Chief Advancement Officer here at ACT. And we are luckily in our brand new headquarters south of downtown. So excited to be streaming from this place tonight and excited that you're all viewing. So let me just explain a little bit about what the Justice Summer Series is. And then if you're new around here, new to ACT, I'm going to explain a little bit about what ACT is, what we do, who we are. But before all of that, I want to give a huge shout out to our Justice Summer Series sponsor, Broadcat. Thank you so much to the team at Broadcat for your tireless help that you've invested in ACT so far, and just your friendship and advice along the way. So really appreciate that. So Justice Summer Series. Tonight, we are talking about mental health and education. We have two very distinguished guests that we're excited about. You're going to hear and be introduced to in just a moment. But the Justice Summer Series is really a conversational series that we've been doing for about 3 years now. And it's really meant to just elevate issues and injustices that have existed throughout our city for generations. So in the past, we've done racial equity. Most recently, we've done affordable housing crisis and gentrification. And then we did why safety just in June. And again, tonight, we're talking about mental health and education. So ACT, who we are, stands for Advocates for Community Transformation. We work in high crime, underserved parts of the city to mobilize and equip residents to fight crime on their street. And we also share the hope of the gospel with them. So we are a Christian-oriented organization. We certainly don't impose our beliefs on other people, but we want to share the hope of Jesus and the hope of Christ with them if they're open to it. So we have a vision that really fuels our efforts. It really is to see safe neighborhoods where crime is no longer tolerated, and those neighborhoods that have been affected by crime, by violence, by all sorts of injustices can thrive and flourish like probably the neighborhoods that most of us live in. So again, so excited for you to be here tonight for this series. And with that, I would love to pass it on to my colleague, Evangeline Heppenstall, who is tonight's moderator, to introduce our distinguished guests and take us straight into the conversation. Thanks again.
Good evening. My name is Evangeline. When I am not moderating Justice Summer Series panels, my day job at ACT is to manage and grow our relationship with foundations. Often this entails some pretty extensive grant applications, and they want to know, who are our clients? Who do we serve? Are they kids, adults, senior citizens? Our clients engage in legal casework so that they can shut down the high crime properties on their street that are next door to their homes, across their street from the homes, sharing alleyways. To be a client at ACT, you need to be over the age of 18 because we will engage in an attorney-client relationship with you and with our volunteer attorneys from our partner law firms. But behind these adults, behind our clients, are the children and their grandchildren. So the daughter who cannot play in her yard or ride her bike up and down the street, and the grandchild who can't sleep over because right outside the bedroom window is drug activity and prostitution. But if we at ACT and our partners and all of you who are here tonight are going to walk alongside our clients who live in high crime neighborhoods, then we need to know more about how a child's environment affects their growth, their development, their sense of safety. Because living in an unsafe neighborhood is just one part of a child's development. And so tonight, we have two excellent panelists, and we're going to talk about mental health, education, community engagement, and at the very end, we're going to have a Q&A session. So I ask you now, if you think of a question you'd like to ask our panelists, please go ahead and shoot it through the system as soon as you think of it. Back at our last Justice Summer Series, we had some excellent questions that came in just a little close to the buzzer. We weren't able to get them in front of the panelists on time. So I encourage you to think fast. With that, let's go ahead and dig in. So we have two panelists with us tonight. I'm going to start with Jamila Thomas. Jamila has a passion for children, racial equity, education, mentoring. She's a senior vice president for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Greater Dallas, and she's responsible for the strategic planning around corporate and community engagement. Before her time with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Greater Dallas, she was asked by the Dallas ISD Board of Trustees to establish the Racial Equity Office for Dallas ISD. So she was responsible for creating culturally responsive policies that are designed to close the achievement gap while also building culturally intelligent practices for all faculty and staff. She's a native of Dallas. She spent her undergraduate time at Florida A&M University, getting a degree in business administration, as well as an MBA. She also has a Master of Arts in Divinity from the University of Chicago Divinity School. And last but not least, she's a 2019 Presidential Leadership Scholar. Welcome, Jamila. Next up, sorry, we might have to be a little bit patient with the delays in between speakers, so if you can give me some grace, all of you out there. Dr. Brad Schwal is our next panelist. He has been providing counseling, training, and curriculum development for over 25 years. He's the president and CEO for the Center for Integrative Counseling and Psychology, whose mission is to provide quality counseling and psychotherapy services where people live, work, play, and pray. You may see him on TV because he is regularly interviewed on topics of mental health for Channel 8, and he works with and within churches, schools, health systems, and nonprofits to encourage the mental and emotional health of children, teens, adults, families, and communities. So pretty much everyone. You can help all of us, Dr. Schwal. He has a Doctor of Ministry in Pastoral Psychotherapy from Garrett Theological Seminary on the campus of Northwestern University. He has a Master of Divinity at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He did his clinical residency in Pastoral Psychotherapy at the center. And he also has his Bachelor of Science in Education from Baylor University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Schwal.
Thank you for having me.
I also would like to mention briefly, unfortunately, the panelist Justin Henry was unable to join us. He is a member of the Dallas ISD board, and they had an unexpected board meeting scheduled tonight. Let's add him and every board member in our prayers as they work on launching all the students of Dallas with the start of the school year. Okay, let's get started. I'd love us to start with square one. So getting a basic understanding of the types of trauma and adversity that affect children. So Brad, can you start us there, please?
Absolutely. And when I'm speaking, I am representing caring therapists and psychologists who are working with families who, while they are facing obstacles, stress, trauma, they have resilience, they have a care for their children. And when I'm speaking, I'm talking about these families who have so much happening in their lives that are at a macro level, a systemic level, but then the daily stresses. And one factor that we look at when we think about the mental health of children, and that really does inform our work in areas of poverty, are what we call ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. So these are experiences that involve witnessing violence, being the victim of violence, having an ill parent, having a parent or caregiver who deals with mental illness or substance abuse. Research shows that 61% of adults have had some type of adverse childhood experience. The issue is that when we fail to give children who have experienced these adverse experiences support, help, therapy, when we face these adverse experiences, we are more likely to engage in behaviors that are more risky, that are more dangerous. Children who grow up and they have experienced those experiences and are not helped and supported are more likely to abuse substances and in many ways repeat the patterns. So we will be talking about solutions to that, and Jamila and her work in the world of mentoring, such an important resource. But bottom line, just so you know, when I'm speaking, I'm thinking of kids in West Dallas who are resilient, funny, they've got so much potential. And I do want to almost begin with the hope that there are caring organizations like ACT who focus on Christ's love and providing that practical, important help that will make changes. One of our community partners in West Dallas is Brother Bill's Helping Hand, a very similar mission of sharing Christ's love, sharing Christ's hope, at the same time providing services that are life-changing and life-saving: food, groceries, healthcare. So when we look at children, we recognize they face depression, they face anxiety, they face trauma. This is exhibited in a variety of ways, but I hope tonight that we can talk about solutions and also talk about those who are watching, whatever it is that they're doing and how they got connected to ACT, validating the importance of that involvement.
Thank you, Dr. Schwal. So when I was doing a little bit of introductory digging on this topic, I kept on coming across this term toxic stress and was wondering, it sounds like that is what happens inside of your body when you are reacting to or being impacted by trauma or adversity. Could you
Absolutely.
describe that a little bit more for us?
So a child's brain is developing until they're in their 20s, and trauma impacts our physical health. Chemicals that are released from stress become toxic, as you're saying. Trauma in children may sometimes look like hyperactive behavior or inattentive behavior or acting out. But that's a signal that the child's brain is trying to push back that trauma, trying to push back that memory. So when they are witnessing violence and it is unprocessed, then that creates complications and is a barrier to their learning. Again, they might exhibit that brain's attempt to push back that trauma with behaviors that are disruptive. They are, in essence, externalizing the experience that they had. So then that leads to difficulties at school, and that is why we need mentoring. That is why we need schools who are going to be in tune with the fact that child behavior is not just a matter of a child trying to push somebody's buttons, but that it is a direct effect of witnessing violence, of witnessing stress. So all children, and we all face a certain level of stress, but when we add traumatic events to that, when children's brains are exposed to witnessing that violence, that substance abuse by a family member, that's creating those chemicals in the body that are stress-based chemicals, and therefore they're less able to learn, less able to focus. It disrupts their ability to have healthy relationships. And the good news is we can help with that toxic stress by giving skills, by teaching strategies. I think there's some other systemic things that we can do economically. So what you're doing at ACT certainly can relieve some of the stresses that children can face. But bottom line, we have to recognize that mind and body connection, and we have to be in tune with the fact that what we observe in children, we've got to look beneath the layers and find out what is leading to that behavior so that we can address it.
So Jamila, when I hear about trauma and unprocessed experiences like that, I can't help but think about all the work you've done in different stages of your life. So working with women at the Cook County Detention Center up in Chicago, working for the Racial Equity Office, and then today in your work with Big Brothers Big Sisters. So can you tell me a little bit more about the other types of trauma that might come from racism or generational poverty or living in communities that have been historically underserved?
Yes, I think what's critically important to point out are the historical ramifications of race that have perpetuated the traumas that Dr. Brett is talking about. So this is not something that over the last 10 years have just occurred and now we're experiencing these toxic stress events, but rather this is something that has become a part of the lineage of our experiences here in America. And so when we begin to unpack those things that we understand are critically from our experiences here historically, then that helps to sort of undergird our understanding as to why certain communities may have more stress than others. When you think about COVID-19 and what's happening now, what comes to light is that communities of color are experiencing it much more broadly than other communities. Okay, well, why is that? Well, there are historical reasons for that. And so once we begin to dig into aspects of racial equity, events that have happened in various communities that have impacted lives over generations, then unfortunately, but fortunately, it makes sense. It makes sense why certain communities are ravaged by violence. That goes all the way back to redlining, right? And how communities were segregated based on the criminalization of a person's skin color. So this is not something that is new, that even most of us, I would imagine that Dr. Schwab would agree that it's not surprising, that these are things that have been going on for a significant period of time. And so as it relates to mass incarceration of Black and brown people, that's historical ramifications of race. So all these things tie back to what is being considered the sort of toxic syndrome of what we've been experiencing over the last 30 to 40 to 50 years.
So I wonder, Dr. Schwal, if the body produces toxic stress when it's experiencing these adversities, is it producing the same, is the body reacting whether it is trauma from abuse or a parent with addiction, or whether it is trauma from living with food insecurity or dealing with overt racism, if the body is kind of reacting in both instances?
When we talk about adverse childhood experiences and stress, all of those cause stress. So we really can't differentiate. And I think each issue that you just listed, we must address and find ways to prevent those issues. And whenever I talk to educators about childhood behavior, the principle of we don't want to focus on what behavior we want to get rid of. We want to replace the behavior with healthy, appropriate, pro-social behavior. So the same thing goes with each of those issues that you mentioned, whether it be systemic racism, whether it be food insecurity. How do those issues need to be replaced? How can they be addressed? So 20% of Americans, and that includes adults and children, face a mental health issue any given year. There's a higher percentage of those in poverty who go to a clinic, go to a healthcare facility, and they present with a diagnosable mental illness. And so we look at that and we look at those stressors that are leading to that. Another statistic recognizing that 10% of children at school are experiencing difficulty learning based on their mental health issue. So I really don't think we can differentiate from the different types of catalysts for the stress. There's processing that happens no matter what that stress is.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Dr. Schwal. So if we zoom out a little bit and we think about a child's environment and all the different types of environments that a child moves through over the course of their day, their home, their neighborhood, school, mentoring or community organizations. I'd love to hear some of the positive ways that a child's environment can impact their sense of safety or stability. Jamila, will you start us off with that?
Yeah, so the question is, how does a family's experience impacts a child's development as they are moving towards their trajectory of where they're supposed to be? Is that your question?
Right. So how, kind of thinking through a positive lens at this point of how their home life, school, and community organizations, what influence can they have, these environments, on kind of positive senses of safety and stability, bonding, perhaps?
Sure. So, well, quite naturally, you spend a lot of time in places where you have your sort of extended family, whether it's your mother, I'm talking about children specifically, or your grandmother, right? People that are your aunties, whoever they may be. And so one critical component of having a healthy environment is this notion of love, extending love and support, because what comes from love is a sense of security and safety. Now, different dynamics of family environments are beautiful in their own right. So to suggest perhaps that if you're coming from a two-parent household does not necessarily suggest that you don't have the same love and care if you're growing up with your grandmother. I think that's also something that as community empowerment people have to recognize, that if you have a child that is living with their grandmother, who is the most caring individual she can be, right? She may be dealing with some of the stressors of life, but she's providing the best home for that child. And let's say they're sleeping on a couch, right? But that child is given the most love and care that they can. Who's to say that family environment is not good for their child in comparison to a child that may be sleeping somewhere else? So I think this notion of making sure that we understand family dynamics and what that means, and how it impacts a child's life. As it relates to community organizations like a Big Brothers Big Sisters, right? Our main purpose is connecting hearts with hearts, humans with humans, caring adults with children who deserve to have a caring adult in their life. And we walk alongside individuals and their families that want to have mentors in their children's lives. So it's not like we are stepping in to do something extra necessarily. We're walking alongside you to provide a loving, caring, and supportive environment for a child that deserves to have additional people in their life that can provide them with resources and services that perhaps they wouldn't have access to had they not had the social capital that we as Big Brothers and Sisters can provide. We have individuals that come from all across the city of Dallas County, that are pouring into the lives of young children. And they're providing resources that perhaps that child wouldn't necessarily be able to have access to, that we not have this opportunity to connect from a mentorship perspective. So yes, to answer that question very directly, community support, home environments, regardless of what they look like, as long as it's a loving and caring and safe environment, including the school environment, making sure that the teachers and the dynamic of where their children are coming from in a particular classroom. So when you pair those things together, you're developing a holistic experience for a child. When they're receiving love and support and resources from all of those sort of triangular resources, then you have the makings of a wonderful environment for a child. And what better way to do that than making sure that those three components, right? Community, school, and family are on the same page. And the goal is really to make sure that those children are connected with those three entities in a very succinct way.
That's so interesting, Jamila. And it leads me to ask you, Dr. Schwal, if you don't have support systems that are on the same page, like Jamila was saying, and you might have a difficult home environment, but a supportive school environment, or a different combination of that, how do those environmental influences interact with each other? Do they cancel each other out? Is one more powerful than another on a child's development? How do they play with each other?
Sure. So schools do so much to care for kids and absolutely can have an impact on a child's trajectory. We at the center have therapists who are officed who co-locate in other nonprofits, and they can see those different aspects of the child's life. The good news is that Brother Bill's and we have the funding to have a psychologist, Dr. Marisol de Jesus Perez, who has worked with clients whose families have a child who talked about committing suicide because one of her friends had died from suicide, died from depression, mental illness. And that played out in the child's life with issues at school and in conflict with her parents. In this situation, we had the ideal setup where we had a mental health professional, a psychologist who was able to be in the community who could help that teenager in thinking about her parents and about that relationship, could help that teenager tap into her potential and tap into hope. And so while that teenager said, I'm giving this 6 months, the psychologist responded calmly and focused on building the sense of self in the teenager. But then there was practical help done related to school. Okay, what help is needed with learning differences? So in an ideal world, we do have all of them working in concert. I do believe that when organizations work together, we can influence that to happen. But I do have that hope, and I always hold that hope that when children have positive experiences, the Search Institute has what they call the 40 developmental assets. So their community support, their spirituality, positive values, that when we can build up those strengths and those assets, that we can overcome where there are areas of a child's life that are unfortunately neglectful or not encouraging of their development.
Thank you, Dr. Schwalb. So Jamila, something that I did not mention in your introduction at the beginning of this panel was your role as policy chair on the National Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion National Committee. So on the one hand, you are very involved in the policy and maybe even advocacy elements of racial equity and then these issues that stem underneath. But then I would also suspect that in the different stages of your life, you've also very much been on the ground and in the real lives of children that are coping with these types of scenarios, maybe specifically more in racial equity. You'd have to tell me, what are your experiences in this area?
You mean my personal experiences growing up?
Mm-hmm. Or at the Cook County Detention Center, or with the types of children that you provide the mentoring services to?
Sure. Yeah.
Or in the
yeah. So my, it's interesting. So in Chicago, when I've sort of gotten this calling, if you will, to work with young people that were in the juvenile justice system, I have to admit I had this sort of naive way of thinking. I was thinking like I can go in and provide mentoring and we could change the world together. Really not considering all the systemic factors that those young people were experiencing in their lives at that time. And if you've ever been into a juvenile facility, you have to strip down everything. Your hair has to look a certain way. You have to take earrings off. You have to make sure that there's a level of safety involved, right? And so I'll give you a scenario and walking into one occasion where I would go into the facility and we would be in a room together as they were coming out of their cells in the common area. And you can imagine there's about 10 to 15 girls there, and between every 3 or 4 girls is an armed guard. And so in order to sort of get a rapport with the girls, I would do an activity, basically an anonymous game where you can write down any question that you want to ask. And nobody will know where this question is coming from because it's anonymous. And so you write the question down, and the questions ranged, I'm going to be frank, from sexual experiences to Jesus. I mean, they ranged the whole gamut, right? Because they were seeking information. And so one of the last questions that I did get was simply, is God here? And it was at that point that I simply said, well, you just invited God in by asking that question. And so I say all that to say that my experiences in working with young people who have had experiences ACEs, and a number of other sort of adverse experiences that would have them in those positions. One thing is common is that they're human. They're human, living with human experiences, and some children have been born into environments that they did not ask for, and so they're trying to, as a human, cope with these things in the best way possible. Whether it's eating, finding a place to sleep, all these things that they're making decisions in as a child, but trying to essentially survive. And so my experiences in working with them and trying to give them as many resources as possible for a 12, 13, 14-year-old child looks different than it would be for an 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old woman. And so what I found to be interesting is that when I began to develop these relationships and gotten to know them, there was always this sort of stream of experiences that they all had. And it was around their home life. If their home life is not stable, for the most part, they're going to have some experience that perhaps some of us will not. And so when they're dealing with that, they can have 2 or 3 people around them that may come from the community that can help steer them along the way. Even though they're going back into an environment that's not conducive for their learning, there's a chance that they could make a shift and make the right decisions and perhaps seek out help on their own. So there's a variety of experiences I've had with young people, whether it was in Chicago and Cook County, or even here in Dallas, and working with young people in Dallas Independent School District as a mentor and learning their experiences. One last example I'll give you, there was a young lady who was at my alma mater, Lincoln High School in South Dallas, and I had just gotten back to Dallas, and I wanted to do nonprofit work with my own not-for-profit, and so I obviously went to my school that I graduated from. And so I was taking them on a mini college tour to SMU. And so there were about 5 girls, and they all came from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Some of them came from the South Dallas area proper, some of them from different areas. And so this one young lady was from South Dallas. She said, Jamila, Miss Jamila, I can't go. And I said, well, why can't you go? And she said, well, I have my baby with me. I said, well, do you have a car seat? And so, I said, you know what? You bring your car seat, I'm going to bring my car seat, and we're going to go on this SMU field trip together. And so here we are at SMU with our baby strollers together, because I just had my son about 2-3 years prior, and we're walking SMU. I'm walking SMU's campus. I say all that to say, when you have someone in your life as a child who's experiencing these very traumatic things, there could be one spark that changes the trajectory of your life. Right? One thing that says, I can do this. There's something in me that's begging me to go towards a greater path, a greater future. So there's so many different variables that go into a child's life that are experiencing very traumatic things. But if you could give them a spark, that spark may not come home. It may come from a community member that just says, I want to step in and help. Then the trajectory of that child's life can perhaps change.
So I love where that is taking us in the conversation, because I'd like to dive into how do you treat these childhood adversities, and then we can also talk about how do you prevent them. But just very practically, I guess, once they've occurred, Dr. Schwal, what do you do? I mean, I guess you do what you've been doing for 25 years.
Yes, you did break up a little bit, but I think I got the question. So what our therapists and psychologists do is they do help in processing the thoughts, the feelings associated with a traumatic event, and then process what the actions are that led to. So we were doing a group at an after-school program, and a child had witnessed a fatal car accident, and that child would avoid that area where that happens. A very, very natural response, and in many ways didn't impact the child, but through a process of helping the child process and talk about and get out those feelings and those thoughts and understand the impact, then they can develop coping skills. Skills that are physical skills, taking deep breaths for one, something that seems so simple, but our therapists, for example, at Wesley Rankin Community Center in West Dallas, focus on teaching very basic mindfulness skills to kids. So one is getting those emotions out, changing the way they view something, but then also building up those skills for mindfulness, feelings management. We focus a lot on social and emotional competencies. So by teaching skills, we're equipping the child to find ways to replace those behaviors that are not helping them in coping with skills that can help them to cope. So through therapy, and that does also involve work with the schools. Regularly, our psychologists will find that a learning difference has not been tapped into. At the center, we provide therapy across North and Central Texas, from McKinney to Waco, Rockwell to Arlington. We see people who have insurance, who have resources. We believe that mental health is a health issue, so we want people to be able to use their insurance. But people that we see do have resources, and we take those services into communities where there is poverty, and we get funding to support that work. What unites all that we serve is that we all struggle. We all can face a tragedy, a trauma. And I like what Jamila said. I can tell she's bringing out her spirituality as a person, but also she's got that theological training from seminary. But God is present. God created us in God's image, so that same ability to love is in us. We just have to tap into it. And certainly at the center, we honor faith, and we see how God is present in the room. And so we can't deny that. At Brother Bill's Helping Hand, they use a depression screening tool developed by UT Southwestern. And Dr. Trivedi, who led that project, said that the remission rates for depression were higher at Brother Bill's than at any of the other sites where he was implementing the screening. And in talking to Wes Keys, the executive director there, we truly believe that because we are focused on the mental health, the physical health, but also the spiritual, that's how we're seeing more of an impact. So processing, teaching skills, providing ways to get resources for children from schools, helping parents to understand their children, all are important to responding. Preventing is done by building up networks of support. I fully believe in mentoring, and one thing we may talk about is how people on this call can help. Certainly give me a call, and we can talk about ways that we work in the community. I'm sure there's opportunities there, but I also encourage mentoring. What Mercy Street does, what Big Brothers Big Sisters. Relationship leads to healing, and that also leads to prevention.
Jamila, when I hear Dr. Schwal talk about all those elements, I hear the potential of community engagement in treating and preventing these adversities. So while it may not be psychological services, it sounds like perhaps the services that schools may provide or that mentors may provide at Big Brothers Big Sisters could be hugely helpful in this process. Can you tell us a little more about how schools can be involved in treating and prevention, and Big Brothers Big Sisters, similar types of community engagement organizations?
Sure. What a wonderful plug, guys. Thank you. So a couple of things. When I was working with Dallas Independent School District, I received a number of phone calls from people saying, "Hey, are you aware of the additional services that can help our students and parents and really teachers as well?" And so at the time, this is like probably 3 or 4 years ago now, but I was trying to think of creative ways to bring in resources that would be different than the traditional way of utilizing services, psychological services in the school. And so long story short, I reached out to the Dallas Yoga Center, and Daniel and David Sunshine, who are the owners there, they do mindfulness practices. And so right around this time, this is when the mannequin, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a mannequin challenge that all the kids were doing, where they would just get really still and pretend like they were mannequin. So we juxtaposed the mannequin challenge with bringing in yoga and mindfulness to about 4 or 5 elementary schools. So if you can imagine, about 100 and 150 third graders. We worked with third graders, fourth graders, and fifth graders, I believe, at the time. But imagine 300 third graders in a gym, all right? And they're practicing a mindfulness with yoga poses and a variety of other sort of tools and techniques. And I will never forget, at the end of our session, we will always have them to do sort of this prostrate pose, or this sort of laid on the floor, basically kind of laying back. We would participate with them. And for about 5 to 7 minutes, we would just say, calm, listen to your heart. You would hold your sort of kind of listen to your heart here, hold your fingers up to your neck and hear your sort of pulse, hold your heart. And literally you could hear a pin drop. And probably like 3 or 4 minutes into the session, you would hear snoring. And so what that told us is that our children just needed a time to relax, relate, and release. And so we utilize creative ways to just utilize and introduce this concept of mindfulness to young people. And the goal was for them to also not only use it at school in their classrooms, and the teachers were also participating as well, but that they would take it home. And every teacher that we worked with received a Tibetan singing bowl. And so the goal was that the teachers would utilize it in the morning, so to hit the bell and, allow everyone in the class, including the teacher, to become relaxed. And then we would encourage the teachers to use it either before and after lunch, before and after recess, because, after that, everybody's kind of jittery and excited, to kind of calm the room in preparation for education, for instruction. And then we would encourage them to utilize it at the end of the day, because let's be clear, who's taking home a Tibetan, all the kids don't have Tibetan singing bowls at home, but what they do have is sort of their inner spirit. So we would hit that bell at the end of the day so they could take that sort of bell that they, virtually would hear home. So if there's anything happening at home that was an adverse childhood experience, or any of these things that were exacerbating perhaps trauma, at least they could come back to that heartbeat, which is their bell, kind of settle themselves at the process and think. And so what was really powerful about that is that young people will begin to utilize those practices in the classroom. And so that was the goal. So pose this question about what other things can you do with respect to community engagement. That was one of the things I thought was critically important, is to bring in resources that are already available to us. And graciously, the Dallas Yoga Center donated their services, and it was a phenomenal partnership that really began to introduce new techniques, for our teachers and for our students to utilize in order to calm their hearts and their minds and spirits as they began to sort of dig into instruction, and then obviously once they would leave. So Big Brothers Big Sisters, how we came in, or how we can be of service, is that we simply provide mentors, people who have raised their hand, your families and young people who have raised their hand and said, hey, I want a mentor in my life. And there are adults that have said, I want to give back to the community. I believe that I can provide social capital. I can provide resources. And so we encourage people to go to our website and fill out an application and become a mentor. And we take it very seriously. Every single match that we make has a dedicated social worker assigned to them. So anything that is coming out of those experiences that are growing organically, we sort of have a tap on to make sure that we are providing additional resources if necessary for those matches. If a big comes up against something that is kind of hard to handle themselves, then the match support specialist steps in to say, hey, these are some of the resources that we can provide to you and the family. So 100%, I believe that community engagement is sort of holistic view. There's an African proverb that says about the village raising the child, right? That is critically important.
I love that idea. And I'm going to see when we send out a follow-up email after this, if we can include the link, see if there's any mentors out there listening tonight. Dr. Schwal, I see some questions stacking up, but before we head into those, I do want to hear from you. What suggestions do you have for those of us who are listening tonight on how we can help you with the work that you do and help communities I guess, both our own, right, that we're support networks for, but also in other parts of Dallas, help with the situation?
For sure. One is be open and aware to the fact that mental health is a health issue, that having depression is not the sign of a lack of faith, that depression has physical components to it, that it is okay to get help and reach out, that is not a sign of weakness. Instead, it's a sign of strength. And so I think by having that openness to the issue of mental health and destigmatizing, and often that does happen, and that has happened in the church over the years, is that there is this issue of, just pray. I believe in prayer, but I also believe that God puts people that can help us. So first start with that awareness. Pay attention to how mental health does impact all that's happening in the world. Right now, we are extremely busy. We are getting more and more and more calls for therapy. We've been increasing our work and our reach, but we are seeing that people are obviously dealing with anxiety. Be in tune with how mental health is interrelated, trauma, how it's connected with systemic racism, how it's connected with poverty, certainly, and how the pandemic is complicating things. Children, there haven't been as many reports of child abuse because children haven't been out at school and at activities where they're crying out. And so I know when things opened up a little bit, advocacy and center in Waco, I'm familiar with, they had a lot of calls after things started opening up. So be in tune with that. Find ways to get involved. I'll go ahead and say we need support. We need people who have expertise in different areas, health, law. We need that type of help. I will say we need funding because so many families, and the families that we serve, don't have insurance. There are barriers of language, transportation, finances, and we need the funding to bridge that gap of lack of access to counseling and mental health care, not because the families don't have insurance. So increased rates of mental illness in areas of poverty, addressing mental health can help create security. So I'll just say that funding for mental health care is important, and there's a piece of our work that can't be reimbursed, and people don't have resources, and so we need that funding. So I think education, awareness, using your talents and gifts to help organizations, and then just quite frankly seeing that need and seeing that need and the importance of making counseling accessible, because when children face these adverse experiences and they don't get help, it just leads to that cycle furthering. And our goal and what we see is that we can impact generations to come.
Thank you, Dr. Schwal. Okay, let's see how this Q&A system is going to work. I believe, here we go. Okay, our first question. How can people outside the public school system advocate for children and parents in Dallas? Jamila, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, when making the decision to transition careers, if you will, from education proper to still working with children, I knew that Big Brothers Big Sisters was an opportunity that really fell in line with my calling. So one of the things that we know is critically important is that this idea of social isolation, that our children, along with our parents, are feeling the burden of being alone, if you will. So Big Brothers Big Sisters, we are transitioning or have transitioned our mentoring to be online. So now our bigs and littles can communicate with one another. They're taking field trips to Paris virtually. They're going to the San Diego Zoo. They're doing a lot of fun activities to stay engaged. But I would encourage anyone out there that is trying to be an advocate for children, fundamentally and very directly to sign up to become a mentor. You're more than what it meets the eye. It's just not a mentoring relationship. It is sort of a familiar experience where you're getting to know the children and their families. So with that being said, that's another way in which you're impacting the parents, right? Helping them to walk alongside one another to give resources and opportunity and time to young people and to adults who really are wanting engagement. I think we're taking it lightly that we are in a pandemic and that we are being asked to stay at home, stay inside. As for those children who are at home and inside places that are not conducive for their learning or for their growth and development, then what better way for that young child to have sort of another entity there to kind of be eyes along the way with that parent and that child to grow and develop them. So I am, although I work for Big Brothers and Sisters, I'm a firm believer of it. I've been a mentor probably all my life, probably since I was 13 years old. And one thing I can say about Big Brothers Big Sisters is that we take it extremely seriously. This organization was started over 100 years ago and is still in business of making sure that young people have a caring adult next to them, in addition to their parents having someone that's also walking alongside them. We don't have the time, but I can tell you a number of stories where the parents have really depended upon the mentor to kind of help guide them along the way when their child was sort of distancing themselves a little bit. So if you're looking for network, I 100% believe that Big Brothers Big Sisters is the organization for you. And I believe the link will be shared here shortly.
Great. Let's see if we have time for one or two more. Okay, here we go. DISD recently stated that they would double their number of mental health professionals this year. What's another resource or institutional change that would help support students and staff?
I'm going to say that certainly is, yes, that is wonderful news. One answer to your previous question that I think relates to this one, and that is church-school partnerships. When churches adopt a school and provide mentors, provide resources, provide support to teachers, I think that is an excellent way to support the schools, even if you're not working within the schools. So yes, the schools need mental health professionals. I am going to also say community collaboration with schools. Our center and I have been a part of the Bud Center that's out of SMU's School of Education, the Simmons School. They have a program called the School Zone. And so I provided training for nonprofits serving youth in West Dallas. We have what we call a social and emotional professional learning community. And so we meet with counselors from DISD, and there's some great counselors who from Youth and Family Services in the district that are part of that, along with our staff, along with staff at Wesley Rankin and other organizations in West Dallas. So I would say that is good news. I would say too that at a on the ground level, we need community collaboration and support for the schools from groups like the Center and Big Brothers Big Sisters, because I believe that can create more of a safety net for kids that will bridge their worlds and help them be more consistent and holistic in caring for kids.
Thank you, Dr. Schwal. What do you think? Do we have time for one more?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, here we go.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, from Miss Alendra Lyons. I'm glad you're joining us tonight. Don't forget the parents need help as well as the students. That is an excellent reminder.
Absolutely. Parent education, so key, and that is another example of a way that community collaboration can help. And I keep mentioning Wesley Rankin, but they've helped facilitate parent education. The school was open to it. When schools are open to that, it's wonderful. And I like what Jamila said, that the mentoring with Big Brothers Big Sisters isn't just about the child, but that mentor can be a support and an example. I like that approach.
Yeah. One thing that I would add to that is simply recognizing that there are resources for parents, and I this is just plug because I love the center so much, but I'm actually in a process. I'm a parent, right? I have a 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter who's special needs. And as a parent that is fundamentally involved in education and in racial justice work, and you name it, along with being a parent and a wife, I recognize that I too have to ensure that I'm taking care of myself. And so I'm actually in the process of doing a mindfulness certification to learn more tools and techniques to be able to share with parents and to share with the individuals at Big Brothers Big Sisters, to provide resources that I can to our parents. We serve over 2,000 families in Dallas County and Collin County. So when I'm thinking about ways in which to provide support and guidance to parents along with students, I'm thinking about myself as well. And so one of the things I know that we've all been called to do is to share resources, to share of ourselves. And the best way that we can do that is making sure that we're taking care of ourselves and learning and growing as well.
That's a reminder I need for myself, for sure.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. I thoroughly not just enjoyed it, but learned so much. And I'm grateful that you've spent this evening with us.
Thank you. For honored to be a part. Really appreciate all that ACT does, and have admired the organization from afar, but then also close and providing trainings and whatnot. But all those on the call who are supporters of ACT, validate that, encourage it, because y'all are making a difference.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I echo those. It's going to close us out for tonight. Thank you all for joining us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Crane, and I work on our development team at ACT. I just want to thank you again for joining us on the stream tonight, as well as to our wonderful panelists, Brad and Jamila, for your wisdom and insight. I know it was deeply informative to me and a rich encouragement to us all. I want to also thank our Justice Summer Series sponsor, Broadcat, for their generosity in making tonight possible. If you did not have a chance to have your question answered, or if you would like to know more about our work at ACT, we would love to connect with you further. You can email us at info@actforjustice.org, and Emily and I will be reaching out, as well as we have our upcoming annual advocacy and awareness event, Generation Justice, and it's going to be on Thursday, September 10th. It'll be a full conversation, so we hope that you make plans to join us now. You can follow us at ACT_Justice for more details. We hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for joining.